I've been hearing some people think that the Titans are going to be the worst team in the NFL. And for those people, I just have to say, you're absolutely wrong. There is no way the Titans are going to be the worst team in the NFL. Unless they have even more injuries than they did last year, which would really be impressive because they were the third most injured team in the NFL, they're not going to be the worst team. And I say that with the utmost confidence because looking at their roster, there are some real things to like, and coaching wise, they are about as good as anybody in the NFL. So, with that said, let's get started with our investigation of them. I wouldn't consider myself a Tannehill guy by any stretch because I think if he's your quarterback and he's not on a rookie deal, it's basically impossible to win a Super Bowl. But compared to the public, I am actually pretty big on him, I guess, because I see a lot of people acting like Tannehill's a below average quarterback, and that just does not sit right with me. We're looking at expected points added here, and according to EPA, Tannehill was 17th out of all quarterbacks with 200 or more snaps last season. And this stat doesn't take into account the fact that his offensive line was atrocious and banged up. And in addition to that, his playmakers were pretty weak as well. So if 17 is you at your pretty close to bottom, I think you're a pretty solid quarterback. As for their offensive line this year, it's going to suck again. I'm not going to lie to you, but it's probably going to suck in a little bit of a different way than it did last year because Taylor Lewan got replaced by Andre Dillard, who was really highly regarded coming out as a college prospect as he was super smooth in his pass protection. So he does have that going for him, but he basically got no playing time in Philadelphia, which isn't too much of a dig against him. The offensive line in Philly is hard to crack, but there is not much beyond him to be excited for. There's Daniel Brunskill, who is a plus starter, and Peter Skoronski, who was a great prospect for this past draft. I think they're going to be doing things incorrectly if they don't give Skoronski a chance to start a tackle because it's just a more valuable position, and I think he's going to be for sure better than Petit Frere at tackle. Aaron Brewer is serviceable, and then as I was saying, Nicholas Petit Frere was one of the worst linemen in all of football last season, which granted was his rookie year, but are you really going to expect a huge jump from year one to year two? I personally am not. Speaking of jumps from year one to year two, though, Treylon Burks is a really exciting weapon for the Titans. And if they're going to have any success this year, he's going to have to be improving on what he had last season, which was a lot of promise as he averaged 14 yards per reception and 40 yards per game. So, not the best per game stats, but the yards per reception were definitely there. And he was dealing with injuries throughout the entire season. So, if he can just be healthy and improve upon what he's already shown at this point, he's going to be a legitimate weapon. A more concrete weapon they now have as well is DeAndre Hopkins, who missed about half of the season last year, but was 10th in yards per game. So he was super efficient when he did play. And he's not really a burner in the same way that Burks is. He's not going to get you a ton of yards per reception, as he had 11.2 yards per reception, which was good for 69th, which was nice in the entire league. But he is a very solid, reliable pair of hands, which is exactly what the Titans needed. In addition to Burks, the Titans also have Chego Okonkwo at tight end, and he's one of the most exciting young tight ends in the NFL, as he averaged 14 yards per reception as well, like Burks, which puts him in elite territory, as that's Dallas Goedert levels, or dare I say Travis Kelce levels, without the per game production like Burks as well, obviously. So I'm not saying he's going to be as good as any of those tight ends, but that's the territory he's in with his yards per reception numbers. They also have this little known running back you may have heard of. Derrick Henry is his name, who is still a top 5 or so running back in the league, which is insane because a lot of people have talked about him like he's been washed. But no, he is still legit and is one of the best running backs of all time at this point. And he's still got some gas left in the tank, so don't be too worried about him. As far as Nick Westbrook-Ikhine and Kyle Phillips are concerned, I don't think they're pro-level players, to put it bluntly. Ikhine has had some success in the league, but I think that's mainly just he's been the third option for the Titans as they've had no one else. So he's kind of been forced into getting some production. I really don't think he has too defined of a skill set, and he's not too good of an athlete, so that's not really a good combination. What is a good combination, though, is their defensive backs, specifically their safeties, as Kevin Byard is a top 10 safety in the entire league. And then Amani Hooker is no slouch either. He's at least, I would say, average. So that pairs together really nicely. And then they've made some headway on their corner position as well, because they've been investing in it in the draft with Roger McCreary, who's a good slot guy. Christian Fulton is also someone with a ton of potential and has done pretty well to this point. Then they also added Sean Murphy-Bunting in free agency, which I thought was a great move. So they've added a ton to the position, and I would say it's starting to take place as they started meshing pretty well together last year, and I think this year will be even better with the addition of Bunting. And they're starting to get accustomed to playing with each other, which, as I've mentioned in the past, is really a key point for defensive backs, is getting some type of cohesion together. And they're repeating basically the entire group from last year, aside from the addition of Bunting, which I'll take a little bit less cohesion for a major influx of talent any day. Another interesting piece for their defensive backcourt is Caleb Farley, who's shown nothing in his 2 years of play so far, but would have been a top 10 pick if it weren't for a back injury that set him back. So he's still not someone you want to bank on, but he could possibly be something. And if he gives you anything, that is found money, because the expectations are just so low for him at this point. I'd say their defensive line is top 5 in the entire league, though. So it is the real focal point of their defense and team as a whole. Because to start out, they have Jeffrey Simmons, who's a top 10 defensive tackle in the league. And what I love is he is sort of the benchmark for this team, because he is elite as a pass rusher and he's great as a run defender as well. And that carries over with the rest of their defensive line players, as Tierra Tart is the same build. He's good at both aspects. Unlike Simmons, he's not great, but he's really solid in both regards. Danico Autry, he's a really good pass rusher. He's a really good run defender as well. Arden Key, I think, is a pretty massive upgrade over Bud Dupree, as I think he's just better in both facets. He's really been productive in his past 2 years with the Jags and 49ers, which is nice to see, because the 49ers have a habit of getting the most out of everybody on the defensive line. So if he just was coming off of that year, I'd be a little hesitant, but he did it for the Jags as well. So there's no reason to doubt him at this point. He's a freak of nature, and he's also pretty refined as a pass rusher at this point. He's especially good as a stunt player, so that's going to be a match made in heaven. The Titans run about as much stunts as anybody in the entire league. They also have Harold Landry, who I think is probably their worst player on the defensive line, which is incredible, because he is, I would say, at worst, a league average edge rusher. And He's probably a fair amount better than that as well because he plays basically every single snap. So he's probably going to be more productive moving forward now that he won't have to play as much because they've added some depth to this team. And really, him at his worst is still a good player. They also have Rashard Reaver, who I think is a solid complementary piece. He's not especially good at anything, but again, they're so balanced on the line. They can all defend the run and they can all pressure the quarterback to at least some degree. To round out their roster, they have a really solid and improved linebacker core, as Monty Rice is a solid player who's very athletic, and Azeez Al-Shire is one of the most underrated players in the entire NFL. He is an absolute premier linebacker, and yes, he was doing it for the 49ers, which has a dominant front seven and a dominant defense as a whole, so he may not be as good as he looked for the 49ers, but really, I think this Titans front seven is not too far behind the 49ers, which may sound insane to some of you, but I think when you really look at the team, there's just so much to like for the Titans on the front seven. So I think Al-Shire is going to be able to produce at a similar level. He is a really good run defender. He does it, again, sort of like Monty Rice with his athleticism. And he also can cover in space with that same athletic ability. So he is really nice as an addition for them. He is going to be a very clear upgrade over Zach Cunningham, who was first and foremost really injured last season. He only played 6 games, and he wasn't particularly good in the games he did play. So I think moving forward, though, this is going to be one of the best linebacking cores in the entire NFL. And I think they are just going to be massively improved in the front seven, which is nice because they weren't bad in the front seven to begin with. To round out the Titans, their coaching is one of the absolute best in the entire NFL, as they were third in adjusted games lost, which is a Football Outsider stat that looks at the importance of the players that were injured for your team, and they still went 7-10, which is incredibly impressive because if you look at the teams that were worse than them, such as the Broncos, who went 5-12, that is a pretty big difference. Yeah, it's only 2 games, but 7-10, if a couple fluky games go your way, or a couple fluky things go your way, you win those games, and you're talking they still could have made the playoffs, even with being the third most injured team in the NFL. I think Mike Vrabel, the way I look at him is he is a culture guy in the same ilk as Mike Tomlin, to where he may not be the best X's and O's guy, but he's going to get the most out of every player because everyone is going to play their absolute hardest for him. He knows what makes his players tick, and he knows how to get the best out of them, which is super valuable. And it's nice because in conjunction with that, he also knows how to go for it on 4th down, which is not something that Mike Tomlin knows, as he is pretty aggressive, Vrabel that is, with going for 4th downs. And that just gives him a small little advantage that not every coach has, because not every coach is still aware of what the analytics are, and they sometimes just ignore them, whereas Vrabel, he is in congruence with the analytics for the most part, which is, again, just a nice little way to steal some percentage points for you and give you a better chance of winning every game you play in. So with that said, Vrabel is not removed of the X's and O's scheme either, because especially against like the Chiefs, he has shown a proficiency for, at the very least, slowing down the high potent offense of Kansas City, and that is something that he and maybe 1 to 2 other teams in the NFL has figured out. So props to him for that. To summarize, the Titans really have some nice things in place, but I ultimately think they're going to be held back by the fact that their offensive line is really poor. The addition of DeAndre Hopkins is a major one for the Titans because they were really going to rely on Treylon Burks and Chig Okonkwo to be pretty much their only two pass catchers. And now they have somebody you can really feel confident in Hopkins, leading the way. So they are not going to have really much of an issue as far as their pass catchers go. But the offensive line is really going to be problematic. They were worst in PFF pass blocking grade last year. And if anything, they may have actually gotten a little bit worse. So that's really problematic. But there are some bright spots for the future for them because this defensive line is absolutely stacked. Their defensive backs are solid, and the linebacking core is really good as well. So I don't think they're going to be great this upcoming year, but they're not going to be the worst team, and I say that with the utmost confidence. I think they're going to be a threat moving forward if they do get a Will Levis or Malik Willis to be their guy moving forward, because they're going to be on a cheap contract and could be in that Ryan Tannehill tier of quarterback, which is to say good, but not exceptional. And if you get that at a good value, that is really something to watch out for, especially with just how good the rest of this team is. They just need to fill out some spots, and they're really going to be cooking.